So I wanted to basically talk a little bit to our generation, like us, what we call in our church our first generation, okay? So, as in the people who joined the church first, right? We're the first people in our lineage to have accepted the divine principle, right? So the title of my sermon is called The Good Archangel, okay? Does anyone want to read this? In the spirit of participation.
Okay.
Okay, so it's right there.
Okay.
That's probably better.
God created the angelic world and assigned Lucifer to the position of archangel. Lucifer was the channel of God's love to the angelic world, just as Abraham was a channel of God's blessing to the Israelites.
Thank you. Okay, so from the point of view of the divine principle, right? The central person we consider the Messiah like a central person, right? Central person in God's providence. And according to the divine principle, what exactly do we mean when we say Messiah? Like, what is our understanding of the position of the Messiah? Like, what does the Messiah do? Because that's a very broad statement, right? The Messiah. A lot of people have different understandings. So what is the divine principle's understanding of what's the purpose of the Messiah?
Comes to fulfill the promises of the Old Testament and New Testament.
Father? Comes as a father, as a parent? A savior?
He comes to fulfill the promises of the Old and New Testament.
The promises of. So what are those promises? What are the promises of the Old? The building. So how do we build the kingdom of heaven on earth? Like, what's wrong? What's the essential problem that we have? Lack of love.
Not fulfilling the purpose of creation.
So according to the divine principle, there's one thing that the Messiah can do that no other person can do, or the person that the name Messiah is stuck to, that there is no other person that can do on this earth. And that, from the point of view of the divine principle, is the forgiveness of original sin, right? So according to the divine principle, the original sin was caused at the fall of man, right? Adam and Eve fell from grace through the long story of the fall of man. Happened, sad and long story. But according to our teachings, no human being, no matter how good a person they are, no matter how faithful they are, they cannot go beyond the standard. They cannot overcome. They cannot be forgiven from original sin without the salvation by the Messiah. Okay, that's actually the most basic understanding of the Unification Church of what the purpose of the Messiah is. So there's many other things that this so-called central person can do, but the most fundamental thing that that person is supposed to do is remove original sin. In fact, all other problems in humanity are actually our responsibility. We can solve all the other problems ourselves, but we cannot solve the problem of original sin. So, according to our church, what is the process of removing the original sin? Like, what do we see as the event?
Taking the wine ceremony.
The wine ceremony. So the wine ceremony is also called the blessing. The blessing. So we believe that you can't actually fully overcome the fall of man without marriage, right? And it's done through the blessing. Now, many religions throughout history, they have had similar, they have baptism, they have communion, all kinds of things that they do that are sort of representative of the whole idea of removing original sin, right? In Catholic Church, you come and you take the. Actually, in Jewish religion, there's also a ceremony where you drink wine. So there's a lot of ceremonies throughout history of kind of drinking wine. It's a completely symbolic show of something that we don't quite understand, right? And it's not like, wow, I drink the wine and I'm a better person suddenly, right? But we believe that through these kind of religious ceremonies, there's some meaning behind it. And in our church, that meaning, we believe that through the blessing, we begin the process of the forgiveness of original sin. Okay? So many of us that come into the church, we come as basically people who have original sin, and we go through the blessing, and that's a symbolic representation of us trying to cleanse ourselves from that original sin. So according to our beliefs, right, our children are different from us. Our children stand on on a higher spiritual level than we do. They're supposed to be more pure than us, right? And in a way, all generations have been doing this. It's not just only the Unification Church, but we believe that our children are actually the fruit of all the work of the Unification Church. All of the effort that Reverend Moon went through, all the suffering that he's gone through, all the challenges that we have gone through have been for one purpose, and that is for the blessing and to basically pass that standard to our children. Okay? Does anyone not agree with that? No? Everyone, y'all think that, kind of, sort of? Okay, so, here we go. Very confused myself. Okay, so from the point of view of the fall of man, right? Or from the point of view of the creation of man, Lucifer was around a long time before Adam and Eve were, right? And Lucifer helped God create the world. So Lucifer and God were really close, and they were like, let's do it. And then when Adam and Eve showed up on the scene, they came on a different spiritual foundation than Lucifer, right? They came on a deeper foundation. So from symbolically, in a way, when we joined the Unification Church, from the position of, us coming from so-called fallen world, and then coming into the church, and then our children being church and born in the church, they kind of stand in the position of Adam and Eve. And we stand in the position of Lucifer, of the angel, right? So in a way, we kind of sometimes adopt similar attitudes as the archangel. We're like, wow, especially people who have been in the church for a long time, right? Because we suffered a lot we worked very hard, And in a way, Cain and Abel, the difference between Cain and Abel, right? Cain was like out laboring, really difficult. He worked so hard and made his offering, and God didn't accept his offering, right? And then Abraham was like the shepherd. He was a shepherd. He kind of hung around and checked out his sheep. That's what he did. So in a way, sometimes we ourselves in the church, our generation, I think it sometimes falls into the same patterns as we see in the patterns between the archangel and Adam and Eve. Now, not to say that to the extent of us falling the way the archangel did, but in the sense of us kind of wanting to stay on top, The archangel wanted to be on top. He wanted to be the top. And he looked at Adam and Eve, and they was like, wow, they're so immature. They don't know what it was like in the old days, And I've heard things from members, like members that have been in our church for a long time, and like calling kids who have grown up in our church kind of babies, like snowflakes, like they never worked that hard, We really worked hard. And, many of us had to sacrifice a lot to join the church. We had to sacrifice our families. We had to work really hard. Labor, sweat, blood, and tears. And our children have grown up in an environment when they don't have to do that. Now, the question is, what is our position towards them? Should we be like, wow, back in the old days, we worked so hard and you guys had it easy, you had it easy. And, try to make them feel bad. So our position really should be the position of a good archangel, right? The good archangel is supposed to recognize that actually it wasn't Adam and Eve's job to build the universe, to build the world. It was actually Lucifer's job to build the world. And Adam and Eve came to basically inherit it from a different position. It wasn't their job to kind of work as hard as we did. So, how do we do that? How is it that we... Does anyone think that we sometimes do that? Or is that just my idea? Like, for example, I saw on Facebook, there was a group that was supposed to be like a writing group for our church members, and it was called We Were There. We Were There. So you're supposed to write about how great it was when, it's like this reminiscence of the old days of the Unification Church when, we came and we worked so hard and everything was so difficult. And I think that those things are really, really true. But the problem is when we don't, in a sense, step back and raise the next generation. We get kind of stuck on the past. Now, my personal opinion is the Jewish religion is kind of a religion that looks backwards. It's always like, oh, my ancestors and my ancestors' ancestors, and remember the days, remember the days when we came out of Egypt. Like, we're still saying that. We still have Passover, and we're like, remember the days when we came out of Egypt. And when I go to Christian churches, right, Christian churches are like the future, We will be saved one day. Yay, hallelujah, just wait. Wait for the future. It's like constantly looking ahead of us, while Jewish religion is kind of constantly looking behind us. And the Unification Church talks about the past, the present, and the future. Like, we have to have a religion that can look behind us, can live in the present, and can look to the future. We need we need all of that. We need all of that. And Reverend Moon talks a lot about, for example, he talks about like children represent the future. Adults represent the present. And then older people represent the past. So as a generation, as we get older, we become more and more the past. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think that sometimes the biggest problem that we have is not accepting our circumstances. And I can say that for myself. For me, one of the hardest things for me in my life of faith has been to accept my circumstances. But in the accepting of the circumstances, you kind of become liberated, It's like, oh, for example, if your circumstances, you have a certain personal problem, So, like, one way to deal with having a personal problem is like, yeah, well, I have this personal problem because so-and-so did this to me, and so therefore I have this personal problem. So you kind of bear resentment for your own personal problem. But at one point, we all have to look at ourselves and be like, all right, regardless of what happened, this is my situation. And in that, when we accept our situation, we actually have some kind of freedom. So recognizing our position as kind of people who are getting older in the Unification Church gives us freedom. Like trying to fight that and be like, well, I'm still in charge, I'm still the boss. Like, I was there, I was close, I was walking right by Reverend Moon, And like, we kind of seem to have like an attachment to the past. And at one point we have to realize that it's our responsibility, basically, to give to our children what we received. Because I remember sitting in front of Reverend Moon and him speaking directly to me and talking to me and giving me encouragement and blah, 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 blah. I remember that. My children never gonna experience that. They're never gonna experience that because he is past now. So the question is, what can I do to pass that on? How can we give them that experience that we received? Our generation seems to be very quick to like criticize the next generation about the things that they haven't done or how unserious they are or scattered or millennials, snowflakes, irresponsible, blah blah blah. But they never got what we got. They never got the education that we received from Reverend Moon, and we're expecting them to be like us. And it's not their responsibility to be like us. They're different than we are. They have inherited something, and it's not their job to, it was not Isaac's job to kill, to be willing to kill his child. It was Abraham's job, right, to be willing to sacrifice Isaac. But once that was done, it wasn't Isaac's job to be willing to sacrifice his child. He already inherited that. So our children have inherited our sacrifice, and it's not their job to walk the same path as we have. And it is our job to raise them up. So I will end, because this has been so inspiring. Here we go. So this is Moses' course, right? If you know a little bit about Moses' course, Moses never made it to Canaan, right? He actually died right outside of Canaan after 140 years of drudgery and basically walking in circles in the desert. And he never was able to enter Canaan. But basically, God says to Moses, "Take Joshua, the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand upon him. Cause him to stand before Eleazar, the priest, and all the congregation. And you shall commission him in his sight. You shall invest him with some of your authority, that all the congregation of the people of Israel shall obey." Now in Divine Principle and Foundations 3:1-2, and it says, "Because Abraham succeeded in his offering of Isaac, the providence of restoration in Abraham's family could be carried out by Isaac." So at some point, our providence needs to be carried out by our children. We need to inherit that to our children. The end.